it is my pleasure to introduce Nefeli Zahu, talent partner at Moneybox, Sophie Manners, head of people at Gousto, Maya Kuzalti, chief of staff from Ohmi, and Jen Gabrielle Chapman, head of talent at Bought by Many. I think actually almost those companies that you're representing are so well known, we might be able to dispense with the formality of asking you to introduce who you work with and dive straight in to talk about how you found this past year, slightly longer as it has now been. And I'd ask you to sort of speak about maybe what's been the biggest challenge about hiring during the pandemic. Now, there's a huge, broad question, so I'll come to each of you in turn. Nefeli, if I can start with you.
So I think there's been many things that changed during the past year. I think the most prominent thing was candid availability. So the things that we noticed were, first, there was a bit of a disconnect from the culture of a company, which means that people who were unhappy for one reason or the other on a culture perspective in the roles were not having those culture elements around them anymore, so they decided to stick around. We also noticed, we've spoken with a lot of candidates whose partners or significant others or families have been on furlough or let go, so they were quite hesitant to move from the job because of that, because they had support. So yeah. And when it comes to the tech side of things, which is a community that always wanted to be remote, I think a lot of companies were a bit slow to adopt the remote working policy. So I think those this is the key thing, the candid availability for us, at least.
Great, thank you. Jen, can I come to you again for that big question?
Yeah, of course. Hello, everyone. I am actually just going to start by saying Bought by Many has had an exceptional pandemic year, and probably the reason for that is obviously we're focusing an awful lot on making the world a better place for pet parents. So we are one of the leading pet insurance providers that's out there. So on a commercial side, we've had an exceptional year. I've been with the company for 3 months, and I think what I've observed, and obviously what I've gleaned from certainly the last 12 months, is that commercially we're great. So actually in terms of attracting candidates and attracting talent, we're in a really, really strong position. But on a personal level, anyone that I've spoken to, and myself included, I think the biggest stress has been the emotional burden that everyone's gone through for the last 12, 18 months. The uncertainty, not knowing what's going to happen. I guess as well, we'd be remiss not to mention Black Lives Matter and all the events that happened last year too around that. And it hasn't affected everyone in the same way. So while of course we may be an employer of choice and have this amazing brand that people want to come and work for, I'm really conscious of the people I'm speaking to. This is probably one thing that doesn't even factor because they've got so much other noise in their lives that's going on. I think, of course, Brexit, some of the other things are going on again alongside this. All seems to have happened at once. It's just meant that people's brains are a little bit noisier than they would be. So I think for us, moving to a remote first world, interviewing and processing people through the various steps we have, not really an issue because we're that sort of company and we're very flexible anyway. But it's just making sure the candidate experience is sensitive to what else is going on, and if people need to drop out of interviews and move things around, that we're able to accommodate that. So flexibility is key, and thankfully we have a fantastic team who've worked really, really hard to make that a reality.
Great, thank you, Jen. Maya, coming to you now.
Yeah, I think it's been a very trying year for many different reasons. Ohmi, kind of similar to Bought by Many, actually had a great year. Luckily for us, people still need energy, so that worked out okay for us. I think the biggest challenge that we had was before the pandemic, we were very much an office-based culture. So moving into the pandemic, we had to grow rapidly, but equally, we had to reinvent our culture and our ways of working. And that, as a company, was a big challenge. And we had to kind of find a new way to communicate, to keep the culture that we'd built, but have people comfortable to call and kind of interact in different ways. And we tested and learned, and some things we got right, some things we got wrong. And the key thing was to be flexible and to keep it fluid. So what really came through was actually the culture is very, very important. So as we started to look at candidates, we actually would screen based on culture before going into skills. And so we would actually push the burden of making sure the skills were up to scratch onto our recruitment partners, so that actually when it came to interviewing with the rest of us, we interviewed based on values, and making sure they were kind of signed up to the Ohmi vision, what we're trying to achieve, because we wouldn't have that office feel. And you know, we actually hired most of our senior team remotely, and some of us actually just met for the first time, you know, a few days ago. So it's a weird thing, but you know what, I guess our biggest learning was kind of communicate little and often, but consistently.
Thanks, Maya. Yeah, certainly that's a lot of that sounds very familiar. Even here at Bowhurst, about 50% of our current headcount have joined since the beginning of the pandemic. So there's a huge amount of sort of overdue socializing and sort of cultural engagement to be done. Sophie, can I come to you now and ask you what the biggest challenge for you was?
Yeah, and you know, like we've heard previously, you know, it was a phenomenal year for Gousto last year. The way that people shopped for food changed quite dramatically in the first lockdown, and we really saw the benefit of that. And we had, you know, a pretty healthy growth trajectory planned anyway. So for us, it was really about volume. We doubled our workforce last year, and we're kind of more than on track currently to double it again in 21. So for us, the biggest challenge has just been volume and pace. Like others, you know, we're pretty well equipped from a technology perspective. It didn't take too much to kind of adjust to a new way of working. But yeah, for us, certainly it was the volume of the enormity of the people that we've hired in the last 12 months. And over 70% of our workforce has been hired since the original lockdown. So for it's a majority in terms of the way that they've been onboarded and kind of been welcomed into Gousto.
That's amazing, and I'm thrilled that we're all in the sort of the lucky category of people who've had a really good time commercially, if I can put it that way, at least over the past year and more. I'd like to, before we dive into another question, I'd like to just remind the audience that there is a Q&A function. So if, as we're talking, any questions occur to you, do feel free to pop them in, and we'll get to them as they crop up or towards the end of the session. I'd like now to sort of pivot from that sort of overwhelmingly broad question that we started to quite a specific one about what tools you picked up for the sort of interviewing process during the pandemic. Now, I know some of you have said that you were sort of remote first, so I imagine you had tools that you were using already. So it might have been a bit more of the same. But if anyone sort of found something during the pandemic that they think is going to be indispensable.
Yeah, I could probably answer that.
Just, rather than me come you in turn, if everyone's got. Thanks, Jen.
Yeah, I think actually I'm going to flip that on its head. I'm sorry for being a bit controversial. I think actually the pandemic and what we've been through has actually made us realize where maybe there are gaps in our existing systems, because we've really had to test them to the max. We have an applicant tracking system at the moment that's certainly got us to where we were as a startup, but then obviously if you have the same growth that we're all experiencing, how does that work then in a remote first world when frankly you need to have a lot of automation, you need to have a lot of systems that talk to each other, and I think, you know, that's been a very big conversation that we've had, and yeah, we're reviewing on soon to have a new applicant tracking system, a new HRIS that both link up, and a big part of that as well is all the other kind of peripheral kind of SaaS-based systems that we use that may be, you know, criteria for our operational hiring, which kind of does an equivalent of, back in the day, we kind of like a numerical and verbal reasoning test. Do you remember those at school? And then we also have Code Signal, which helps our techies assess the level in which people are coming into. And Zoom, hey, who could ever do without Zoom? And just as simple things as setting up an interview and having a Zoom link included as scratch. I think, you know, for me, it's been educational seeing the change, but it's also helped manage conversations with senior leaders within the business about why the tech that we use, our own tech stack in the people team, is just as important as it is for our consumers.
Is anyone building anything themselves amongst this group as sort of tech-minded people? I've sort of noted it's interesting how we we at Bowhurst use mostly out-of-the-box solutions that already exist, which all have their imperfections. So I wonder if we might see a flurry of people starting to actually to build more of their own, because in other areas of our business we've done that for a while.
Well, on our side, I think there's a strong desire from our technical team to build it, but I think we're having that debate right now of where I think actually it's better that, some of these off-the-shelf solutions, they've done the research, they can get us to a certain phase. Let's not get excited just because we do have those skills in-house, doesn't mean we have to do it ourselves.
Yeah, I think that's a really fair point. Is Sophie or Nefeli, anything you in terms of tools, anything you can't do without that you've now picked up, or maybe it's ways of using them that you've learned during the pandemic?
I'm gonna agree with Maya that just because we have the capacity, it doesn't mean that we have to build something that then we have to maintain, and then we need to hire people to maintain, and it will just end up being probably a mess. But we like to keep it simple. We use Google Suite for our video interviews and organizing pretty much everything. And in terms of technical testing, we found that HackerRank is working really well when it comes to remote code reviews for our candidates. So these two, I think, are the ones that we stuck with.
That's really helpful, and is a great segue into a question we've just had through the Q&A, where Lauren Lindsay is actually asking for recommendations for HRIS. And in particular, any that support sort of digital culture or remote culture.
Yes. So when it comes to HRIS, I don't particularly know how HackerRank will link with an HRIS, but it does link to Lever, which is our ATS. So there's a lot of automation going on there. So once a candidate submits a HackerRank test, then you can get the results on Lever, and then the test can be reviewed online obviously with the interviewer. Without having to exchange any zip or RAR. I don't know if anyone uses RAR nowadays, but without exchanging any files or downloading anything that may be malicious. But yeah, I'm not sure how that integrates with an HRIS though.
Yeah, I was going to say this is something that I know unfortunately quite a lot about because we've just been through the process. If you want a recommendation, and I'm not on commission, but the best one that I've seen so far is Bob. Or Hi Bob. They are superb. Their integrations and APIs work with the majority of top tier ATSs. You can plug and play different things. They're also totally open to building out new APIs. So, just we talked about, you can transfer data across securely and it's no malicious, kind of risk. I'm sure your InfoSec teams would be very happy to hear that. But Hi Bob, definitely have a look at them.
Nice, thank you.
We actually have an end-to-end HRIS launching on Monday. So I feel like I should hold back from making a recommendation, but we've implemented Cornerstone, or we're implementing Cornerstone on Monday, all of the modules across performance, learning, the ATS. So yeah, I don't know whether I can vouch for it as yet, but it's something that we've sped up on the agenda because actually the digitalization of what we're doing, it just needs to be there. So we've implemented it. We started in January and we're implementing it on Monday.
Excellent. Well, good luck with that, Sophie. I hope that transforms into a positive review at least afterwards. Thinking about moving on from the tools that you might have been using for interviewing, looking forward to the future a little bit more about what will your interviewing stay the same? And again, this is quite a different question possibly for those of you who were remote first already, but in terms of the way in which you're hiring and interviewing in particular might have changed during the pandemic. Is that going to be carried forward? Are you going to look to go back to the old ways? I don't think anyone's going to say that, but maybe blended is the way forward actually. Yeah, just some thoughts, and anyone who wants to take a crack at that one.
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, that definitely the first face-to-face interview as well as a technical assessment will be done remotely. So we can be sure about a candidate. A candidate can be in turn sure about us before they take, time off work to come to the office and interview with us. It definitely works for candidates and it definitely works for us. And I think that you get the best of both worlds: speed, that obviously someone can do an interview during the lunch break, and also you get the feel of the person, what they're like when they're in the office once they come for the final. So I think that's what we're going to continue doing.
Yeah,
you were gonna say something.
equally for us. Since we used to be very much office based, I mean, we had so many people meet every single candidate. And I mean, that's clearly inefficient if you're going to scale. So we are currently reviewing our process now to where we can cut it down to 2 to 3 rounds, depending on the candidate, and as much as possible remotely. But yes, that final interview, ideally kind of in the office. The other technique that we've been trialing are kind of team-based interviews. So kind of just to get an idea of when doing a case study, that there'll be multiple people from different disciplines, so we can get a really good idea of how the candidate will engage with the rest of the team.
We will too probably have a fairly similar approach. I think in Gousto, we've got different populations of the workforce. We've got operatives that work in fulfillment centers that pack boxes. It's often much more efficient to still meet face-to-face and run assessment centers. We've got a huge tech community. I would imagine the lasting footprint of the last year and a half would be that we continue to interview remotely. So I think for us, it would be a bit of a hybrid model depending on who we're recruiting and where we're recruiting them in our business.
Yeah, I think from our side, obviously, the future is yet untold because we're not quite sure when everything's going to open up fully. But I think us as a business, we're much more about the kind of candidate experience. So if someone, for example, is based overseas, there's no way that we could realistically get them into the office for an interview. And I think it's important to kind of note, I guess, the general talent mobility. People are leaving the UK to potentially, they've reassessed their lives, want to live somewhere else. I moved from London to Yorkshire. It's not quite the same, but it's still a big move. They asked me to interview in London. That's it's quite a mission. So I think for us, we are really comfortable doing the majority of our hiring, especially for tech, remotely. Plus, it allows collaboration across our different global offices and more people to be, virtually in the room. But yeah, the one piece that probably we have a question mark, similar to you, Sophie, is we have lots of different populations here at Bought by Many. We're not kind of a big fan of the traditional assessment centre, but again, organising it and keeping that candidate experience remotely and making sure everyone gets a good sense of who we are. It is just being mindful, I guess, of where people's heads are at and how they're feeling about the company, as much as how easy or difficult it is for us to meet with them.
Henry, just from our side on that, if you don't mind me just jumping in on that.
Go ahead.
I agree very much with this hybrid. I think looking at it from the candidate experience, as Jen just picked up there, it's a really interesting perspective, because I think obviously initially, a lot of candidates were very happy with the fact that the interviews could all be conducted, by video and actually onboarded remotely, as we were last year. I think there's a very good chance that you're going to want to start. Candidates will want to start actually be able to come into the office themselves and get a feel for these people and meet them face to face as well. So I think absolutely going back to, I think it was Nefeli's point around the first interview, conducting that remotely, so you're not taking time off work. That makes so much sense for both the client and the candidate. But I think as they go through the process, being able to actually maybe have that final stage, as Maya talked about, of actually going in and actually meeting people, I think you're going to start seeing more and more candidates actually want to do that as we ease out of the full lockdown.
Actually, I'm going to just jump in with one other comment on that. Sorry, I completely forgot to mention it. You just prompted me. Also, another big thing that we're looking at is around inclusion, as I'm sure pretty much every company is, and rightly so. There are an awful lot of candidates out there who physically won't be able to get to an office, or will actually find the experience of interviewing in an office. And I'm thinking, I'm neurodiverse, and I found my onboarding and my interview process remotely far less stressful and far less of a burden for me to do it. So I think, again, it's almost putting, you've got the commercial hat on one side, then it's also the candidate experience and what the candidate needs and wants on the other. So I think you're totally right. The flexibility as to being able to offer many, different options depending on the person is going to be really key, because I would hate us to get back to a situation where, we go back a little bit too much to our old ways. And again, those talent pools just get cut off because of the situation they're in.
I think that's a great point, and I'd like to use that to spin that to the other panelists and ask you, will this, the prospect of remote working, will it increase your sort of your talent pool? Are you casting the net wider now? I mean, or have you sort of tried to match a sort of future office-based requirement to where people are now? And to Maya or Sophie or Neffany, however,
Yeah.
So
from our point of view, I would say we definitely have cast the net wider. So we have hired people across different parts of the UK, Ireland, and we're looking into other countries as well. What we're trying to do, or I guess we're testing, what we see definitely with the tech roles is it's almost like the demand is now shifted to where they say, it has to be remote or we can't do it. And that's quite difficult for us because then it's really hard for collaboration time in terms of how the leadership team actually works. And, then it comes back to our communication issue. So I think for us as a company, that's just going to be a cultural learning curve, because I do realize that if we do have a number of developers all over the country and they're not willing to come into the office, and then we decide to qualify them out, then actually we're going to cut off a large part of the market. So that's kind of, I think, a cultural change that we're going to need to make. But what we're trying to also do is we're scaling down the size of our physical office, but encouraging people to come in about 2 to 3 times a week, so that they're getting the collaboration time, they're getting the benefits of the office, but we as a company are not investing too much in a physical space, and it kind of works out as a nice balance.
We're doing something similar. So we're going to have a blend of people who are fully remote. Those people are usually individual contributors, not in any management capacity, because obviously that will require a lot of more face time. And then when it comes to people who are in London or who within commutable distance, we're thinking of having them in the office 2 days a week, one day for mission team meetings and the other day for their own specific team meetings. But yeah, we definitely cast the net really, really wide this time, and it's working out.
We do have net slightly wider. I feel like we've still got clusters, like we've still got clusters or pockets across the UK of where we've hired people from. It hasn't been as drastic as people from all ends of the country, but we've certainly seen it widen.
Great. I've got another question coming in from the audience, and again, another one looking for some quite tangible advice, asking how you might compete if you were doing a fully remote interview process, how you might compete with people offering in person. I guess just as some people sort of want to come to rely on the in-person interview as an interviewer, it's actually a great opportunity to sort of sell yourself as a company and as a brand in that regard. What are sort of the best ways if trying to do fully remote? Sort of jumping the gun and maybe speaking on Stephanie, who submitted the question's behalf, like what's the best way to communicate culture if you're not doing anything in person?
I think, oh, sorry, I'm just going to jump in again. Sorry if I spoke over you. I mean, I think, this is going to sound terrible, and please no one be offended, but I think if you're a good leader and you're a person that's in the room that knows your company and understands your company, I've not seen any notable difference between being able to articulate that in a Zoom meeting versus face-to-face. I think there's perhaps a tendency to feel comfortable going into an office because it's what we've known for years and years. And yes, it's a slightly different setup, but you can tell from me speaking, I'm as you see, that there's no kind of barriers or guises here. And I think if you, as a hiring manager, if you're in the room doing that interview, if you are like this, it really helps because people believe in you, they still get the faith. I don't think you need to be face-to-face. Equally though, if there was a particular candidate that said, look, actually for a specific reason, this is what I really want, yeah, we'd be flexible, we'd arrange it as and when the offices are open back up. And I think we will naturally have people in the office that can do the interviews. It would just, I'd question what the reasoning was behind that and what maybe we're not doing as a business to be able to articulate that through another medium.
Yeah, I think that's very, very fair. Lauren has come in with a another question that I slightly want to preempt with perhaps the biggest question that we'll tackle on this panel. And really sadly, we've only got about just over five minutes left. So I'll praise you all for your concision as much as anything else. It's about, how do you see, tell us from the perspective of all your amazing businesses, what your plans are for the future in terms of remote versus in person. Jen, I think we've already got a sense of what your company is planning to do. So maybe if you want to start and elaborate on what you think the future that looks like, and then I'll come to each of you in turn, because it's a great opportunity to hear what such fast-growing businesses are going to do.
Yeah, no worries. I mean, I think our growth trajectory is going to be pretty stellar over the next few years. We're exploring new territories, new regions. I guess I would say sort of product, and by that I mean in a broader sense. So it's insurance product as well as potentially the online product. I think for us, the flexibility is going to be key. We're going to be looking to, of course, have presence in each of these markets. As to how many people are physically going to end up in the office, to be honest, we just don't know yet. There are a lot of uncertainties, there are a lot of unknowns, and people are still, I think, trying to process that themselves on an individual level. But yeah, I think moving forward, we would be remiss if we were not looking to be remote first, but I do think a hybrid blend is probably where we're going to end up, because of course there are going to be people that still want to get into the office. And I'm thinking about our operational teams, where I know that they enjoy the buzz and having colleagues, and plus our younger workforce, I know have been impacted probably more than the more experienced people that we have within our group. It's really difficult to make those connections, to learn, to upskill. That's probably the one part that I guess yeah, we're really mindful of. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think it does, sort of, especially at this moment. We're still in flux as much as any of us can do. But nonetheless, I am going to come to the rest of you and ask you to have a go. So Sophie, why don't you go next?
Yeah, so like probably very similar in ethos, I guess. At Gousto, we really honed in on choice, and we want our employees to choose and make a choice about where they do their best work. And then the flexibility there. We've got absolutely no doubt that some things are better face-to-face, and whether that's some elements of being a people manager, retros, collaboration. But we have encouraged managers to think about their direct reports, where they do their best work, rather than where a manager does it and where a manager wants their team. So we've introduced a scheme called Work Where It Works. And it basically gives the flexibility. We haven't put a parameter on how many days a week you need to be in or out or at home. I've got peers that are dying to get back at the office. I'm very happy at my dining room table, but there's a whole spectrum of people in between, and we've tried to build something that gives the individual choice about where they work and where they do their best work.
That's great. Maya, can come to you.
So we are definitely moving to a hybrid model, and depending on the teams, so sales teams, for example, we probably have them in the office more versus the tech teams are more remote. The other thing that we are looking at doing is kind of creating centers of excellence with physical locations. So, if for our warehouses, we'll have one in Ireland, one in the Midlands, headquarters will be London. And exploring all of those different kinds of options, because actually we might be able to tap into different types of talent around the country and still have a checkpoint that might be closer to home or more convenient.
And Nefeli.
In a very similar manner, we're going to remain hybrid. We have to. The office fits 100 people. Since we left it last year, now we're like 250, so we can't really go back all together or at the same time. But definitely, we're going to have the remote teams, as I mentioned before, individual contributors that don't really need face-to-face time with their team. And then we're going to also have 2 days from the office for some people. Having said that, we have also been quite open into hiring people internationally, because if someone is meant to be remote and they're doing the best work from home, why not expand to over there? But yeah, hybrid, I think, is the way forward, and that's what we're going with.
Well, that's great. And again, you set me up with an excellent segue into Lauren's question, where she's asking, do you think any staff will be resistant to returning to the office in a hybrid model? if they're happy and productive working from home, and if so, how would you tackle it? I guess, for someone who wants to be remote first, how would you sell hybrid working to them?
Yeah, so that's something we've actually had to deal with already, because we've been coming back to the office for a while now. And it's really, what I find is sometimes kind of breaking that fear barrier. So if somebody's nervous or hasn't, we had some employees that didn't even leave the house during the pandemic. So, it's kind of, how do we ease them in to where they're comfortable? Because the whole time during the pandemic, people had a behavior change, and now we're asking them to do another behavior change. So we've tried to be supportive and patient and just make sure the communication's there. We also happen to have a psychologist that works for the business, so that person's available to speak to people who are nervous about kind of moving back to how they used to work.
I guess there's a difference here as well between the changes that are affected by the pandemic and how people are feeling about coming back in the context of a pandemic, and how people are feeling actually. Have we sort of unveiled that people were not completely, but people weren't happy with the way they were working before, and I guess those probably need to be tackled in different ways and with different sensitivities.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, if bought by many, and bless them, they never would, said, Jen, you've got to be back in the office, we need you in London at least 2 days a week, it would be a big impact for me emotionally, because I don't want to be getting on a train and putting myself at risk, frankly, of getting sick. But also I would hate to be at risk of passing anything on to anyone else that I cared about. You come home and your family's here or your friends are around, there is the risk of it's a pandemic. It's a reason that we've been through what we've been through. But I think, for me as a leader, as a manager, I don't mind where my teams are based. And I think I speak for the whole people team that we have here, which is we just find a way of working. And if things aren't working, we ask why, we question why, we find a new rhythm. And it's that flexibility. I understand that businesses have a kind of a commercial hat on that they need to put on, if we have office space and there's certain out spends that we have on people working in the office. But we've got to be sensitive as employers and as people teams to the people in our business. Everyone will have reassessed what they wanted to do in the future, and I think being respectful of that and not forcing people to do anything they don't want to do is totally the way it should be.
And it's with the commercial hat on anyway. It's multi-dimensional, isn't it? You've got productivity in the sort of immediate sense, but then you've got long-term retention. There's no point squeezing an extra 5% out of a person for only 6 months if they're then gonna leave. Sort of just alluding back to those charts as well, where you can see who's feeling the most squeezed and in what roles at the moment in the tech industry anyway. Right. Well, we are now a few minutes over. Apologies for that. We've answered all of the audience's questions. So I might take that opportunity to wrap up.